It's looking like it's going to be a very, very busy NHL trade deadline in 2019. We've got all the latest NHL trade rumors today, focusing on many, many teams, including the Edmonton Oilers, Detroit Red Wings, Ottawa Senators, Carolina Hurricanes, Pittsburgh Penguins, Philadelphia Flyers, as well as a little bit more. We'll discuss all the latest coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, it's looking like it's going to be an incredibly busy NHL trade deadline. There's all kinds of chatter about all kinds of teams and players, and let's dive in here to all the latest. Now, most of the information I'm discussing today comes from two different sources, one being NHL Insider Trading on TSN from Darren Dreger and Bob McKenzie. The other part comes from Elliot Friedman's latest 31 Thoughts blog, as well as the 31 Thoughts podcast. Now let's get started here with the Edmonton Oilers. Now, the Edmonton Oilers, as we know, are a team that's looking to add and seems to be very, very important to ownership and management that they get into the playoffs. General Manager Peter Chiarelli is basically fighting for his job, trying to make some moves here, and it's really believed now that they're really zoning in on adding something to the forward position, preferably a winger or two, to really bolster their secondary scoring. Now, they should have defenseman Oscar Klefbom back relatively soon, which is going to help the blue line, so they're really zeroed in on focusing on the forward position. Now, there's been a lot of links lately that they've been taking a look at New York Rangers forward Mats Zuccarello. Now, Zuccarello comes with a lot of experience, a lot of playoff experience as well, got into a lot of playoff action with the Rangers here over the years. He's a pending UFA. He's a player that the Rangers have been rumored to be looking to move on from here for a while. I mean, it was reported earlier this year that Zuccarello was basically expecting and awaiting a trade just about any time, and it seems very likely that they will move him sometime prior to the NHL trade deadline coming up February the 25th here. So I do think the Oilers would be a good fit. He does bring a lot of good experience. He has been playing relatively well as of late for the Rangers offensively, so I do think there is a bit of a fit there. There might be other options on the market though that might seem to be, a little bit more offensive that they might want to consider, but it's also going to depend on the asking price. I don't think the asking price for Zuccarello would be as high as some of the other players that have been on the market, so they very well might have to settle for that. But I do think there's a lot to like about that connection there. As far as what the Oilers would be prepared to give up, not necessarily for Zuccarello, but just in general to acquire a winger of that magnitude, they do seem to be still willing to part with their 2019 first-round pick. So obviously that's, and part of that might be that it's lottery protected, or at least, top 5 protected, top 3. Hard to say. I mean, at this point in time, it is possible that the Oilers could miss the playoffs, end up in the lottery, and move up. You just never know how that works. So I would hope that General Manager Peter Chiarelli would be smart enough to at least partially protect that pick should they go down that road and end up trading it. I mean, it may not be lottery protected completely, but perhaps a top 5, top 3, or something to that magnitude, just to make sure if they do get a chance to move up quite high, that they have that option to keep the pick and give the 2020 first rounder instead. It is also widely believed that they have no problem moving out Ryan Spooner and is involved in any trades here, but there is some reason to believe here that they might not want to move Jesse Puljujarvi, that there's a bit of a divide, if you will, amongst Oilers management and ownership group, that some people in that group feel that they need to be more patient with him, and others feel like they should move him, give him a fresh start, and get back something that can help right now, that he's maybe too much of a project to carry on. But the ones inside the Oilers management that are still in favor of keeping Puljujarvi around kind of point to like Vancouver's Jake Virtanen, who obviously came into the NHL as a high draft pick as well. Not quite as high as Puljujarvi, but still is a first-round pick, fairly high first-round pick, and has developed a little slower than a lot of fans in the Canucks probably were hoping for. But, as time has gone on, he's gotten better every year and is putting together a pretty decent season. So, there is some benefits to being patient. You want to give up on your guys too early. You don't want to see the Oilers have another young forward go on to another team and have even more success than they had with Edmonton. We've seen it happen too many times before. So Chiarelli certainly needs to be careful with that. And at least there's some other voices within that team kind of cautioning him to proceed there with a little bit more patience, and we'll see what happens. But it's not a given that Puljujarvi gets moved. But Spooner and the first-round pick are definitely in play to try to bolster that forward position. Now, in regards to the Detroit Red Wings, there's many players on that team that likely could become available, many on our expiring contracts. You get veterans like Gus Nyquist and Jimmy Howard. Now, the asking price for either of those is believed to be a first-round pick at this point, or a high-end prospect at least. And I'm not really sure that a lot of teams are going to be prepared to give that up, especially for Jimmy Howard. there's certainly some teams out there that would likely want to bolster their goaltending position, for a playoff run, but I'm not sure giving up a first-round pick for somebody who's likely not going to be a starter probably makes sense. Now for Nyquist, maybe. Certainly been an offensively talented player in the past. Maybe a fresh start might do him good. I mean, we've seen Thomas Tatar, get moved around from Detroit, end up in Montreal, and he's having a much better season now. So there's certainly that possibility that they could fetch a decent return, but at the same time, it's also believed Detroit might want to hang on to Howard, assuming he wants to keep playing. Maybe sign him for another year or two to go along with Jonathan Bernier. They don't seem to have a lot of confidence in Bernier as being able to carry the load of the games, and that their other younger goaltenders in their system aren't really ready to take on that kind of role either. So if they do end up trading Howard, they'll have to go scouring the goaltender market during the offseason to add somebody else in there. Not to say that they could potentially re-sign Howard as well, because he will be a UFA. But Nyquist is another name to keep your eyes on as well. It might be a forward that some teams that don't want to pay the bigger price tags for some of the bigger names might be able to lean to and get a similar type of return on investment here for their teams for the playoff runs. Now, some other Red Wings too to keep in mind. Maybe a defenseman like a Trevor Daley's got 1 year left. Veteran defenseman might be a useful depth piece for some teams. You got Luke Glendening, might be a decent fourth line player for some teams going into the playoffs. Even Nicholas Cronwall, who's likely going to retire at the end of the year, could potentially be a nice, either third pair or 6-7 defenseman for a team looking to make a playoff run. Obviously, he's got a ton of experience. He's won before in Detroit. He's a very experienced rear guard, can play that physical style of game, even though, injuries and age is certainly catching up to him. He very well also might want to retire as a Red Wing. That might be important to him, and he may not want to be moved. He does have a form of a no-trade clause, so he will have some control over that. And if it's his wish to stay in Detroit and finish out his career, considering the return wouldn't be all that much, I can't imagine Detroit not honoring that. So we'll see, but Detroit certainly has a lot of pieces that likely could get moved here before the deadline as they try to unload some expiring contracts. Now, of course, let's jump over here to the Ottawa Senators quickly. Of course, they've got some pending UFAs drawing a lot of attention to the market. They got Matt Duchene, Mark Stone, Ryan Dzingel. Contract talks are ongoing with Stone and Duchene right now. Hasn't been a whole lot to say about Ryan Dzingel's situation, but Pierre Dorion has met with the agents for Duchene and Stone. Talks are ongoing. They are making every effort to re-sign them. So at this point, for Stone and Duchene is basically the way that we're put it from the insiders, but show us the money and we'll consider staying, I guess. So they're waiting to get to that point where an actual offer is made. There's been discussions around term, parameters about the team's future. They haven't gotten to the point where an actual firm offer is on the table. So that's something they're working on here, and we'll get to in the coming weeks, and we'll see once these what these players want to do. But we'll also see what kind of offers the Senators make to keep them. But Dzingel's a player to watch. If they do come to terms with Stone or Duchene, they may not have enough room to sign Dzingel as well with their own internal budget. So certainly a speedy winger with some skill who could certainly help out other teams. If you take a look at a team like the Oilers that I mentioned, for example, with Zuccarello, there is possibility that they could look to a team like Ottawa and inquire about Dzingel as well. With that kind of speed, he could probably play well with a Draisaitl or McDavid as well. He's got a pretty decent finish as well. He's been on his pace for probably about 30 goals this year. So he certainly could be an interesting piece as well to watch for. I mean, the Oilers and Senators did come close before making a deal a couple of years ago for defenseman Cody Ceci. And Ceci's another name that apparently has been getting some attention as well. Now, he's not a pending UFA, but he is a pending RFA. And this past offseason, the Sens and Ceci had a hard time coming to terms on a new contract, settled for a one-year deal. So he does remain an RFA with arbitration rights. So we'll see, but he's a player that apparently the insiders are saying is getting some interest, and it wouldn't be a complete shocker to see Ottawa move him. I mean, it was rumored a couple of years ago that they pretty well had a deal worked out for Cody Ceci for Taylor Hall before he ended up going to New Jersey. So if that was going to be a one-for-one straight-up deal like it ended up being Hall for Larson, that would have been a complete steal for the Senators like it ended up being for the Devils. But we'll see here. But there was some history there before with Ceci, so maybe they'll rejuvenate that. Once I said, like the Dzingel, there'd be a variety of teams I'm sure be interested. But if he does hit the market, I would like to see probably a team like the Oilers jump in. I think he'd be a great fit to play with a guy like McDavid or Draisaitl in that top six, and maybe they'll go that route instead of Zuccarello. But there's certainly, both make sense for different reasons there. Now let's jump over and discuss the Carolina Hurricanes here quickly. Now, of course, we saw them acquire Nino Niederreiter from the Minnesota Wild yesterday. That was a pretty good trade, in my opinion, for the Hurricanes. Will certainly bolster their scoring punch, but I do think that there's quite possible that they're not finished here. They still have a lot of defensemen on the roster. They have an abundance of guys who can play the right side, and it's been rumored all year that likely one of them is going to get moved. So I do think that's likely is going to happen as they're attempting to acquire another forward to boost their top six or their top nine. I think the only defenseman who's really not available would be Jacob Slavin. Of course, he's not a right shot guy anyways, but between Justin Falk, Brett Pesce, Dougie Hamilton, I do think it's very, very likely that one of those guys gets moved in an attempt to acquire another scoring forward. Of course, we know that the Hurricanes have had a lot of interest in some of the Leafs players, but that's an ongoing discussion we've had for quite some time. It does make a lot of sense for both parties, but right now we don't have any reason to believe they've had any further discussions. But we'll see. All we know is that they're very likely going to trade a D-man in an attempt to acquire a forward, and is that they're also unsure about Michael Ferland as well. Owner Tom Dunn was asked about Ferland's future with the team, and basically he said that they'd like to re-sign him. Of course, it's going to depend on the asking price. So they're going to have some negotiations on a new contract, see where things go. But if they think that the contract there is a little bit too much, then they will likely move him before the deadline. According to Elliot Friedman, some of the teams that have interest in Ferland should he become available would be the Oilers as well. He's another one of the wingers that they're looking at, plus the Bruins and the Penguins as well. I mean, I think he'd be a perfect fit with Boston with that style of play that they like to go with. Even Philadelphia would be a good fit for him as well, but of course that's more likely an offseason move. Should they go down that route, at least I would think so. And the Penguins, I said, are always looking for an extra winger or two for the playoffs, so we'll see what happens there. But those are the teams likely interested in Ferland should they not come to terms on a contract extension before the deadline. Now, of course, as we've been talking about the Penguins here as well, it's been mentioned in previous videos that Derek Brassard likely is going to have a new home by the end of the trade deadline this year. It hasn't really worked out in Pittsburgh, and is looking like his old team, the Columbus Blue Jackets, very well might be interested in bringing him back where he started in the NHL, had some of his more productive years before going on to the Rangers, and then Ottawa, and then, of course, over to Pittsburgh. I think his most productive time came with the Rangers, but, of course, he grew a lot as a player and really developed into a pretty solid center iceman during his time in Columbus, and very well might prove to be a good number 2, number 3 center in their organization. But of course, even though Columbus appeared to be quite interested in bringing him back, I'm not sure that we see a deal going down between them and the Penguins, division rivals, making each other stronger before the playoffs. I don't see that happening. But I've seen that rumor mentioned by a few different insiders and different websites, and I'm not really sure that really the deal makes sense. It does make sense for Brassard to go there. I just don't see the Penguins doing it to make Columbus a better team ahead of the deadline. But a team that was interested in Brassard last year but fell short and ended up getting Paul Stastny instead was the Winnipeg Jets. Wouldn't be shocked to see Winnipeg and Pittsburgh maybe discuss that possibility about bringing Brassard to Winnipeg. Obviously, that number 2 slot, to play with Patrick Laine quite often, not really working out. I don't think Brian Little's the best option for that. If you can drop him down to 3 like they did last year at the end of the year and into the playoffs, makes him a much better team. So, but at the same time, though, I'm not sure Brassard's really the best player there. I mean, I think he's more of a number 3 now in his career, but at the same time, look at Paul Stastny too, going into Winnipeg last year, really boosted his offensive totals and played much better. So we'll say it's just a fact here that Winnipeg did have a lot of interest in him in the past, and very well could rejuvenate that interest here as approaching the deadline, and where the teams in the East and the West, it would make more likelihood here that they might be able to strike a deal and get Brassard over to Winnipeg. I mean, the Jets do have all kinds of younger prospects and things that might intrigue the Penguins here to move forward, so we'll see if there's a deal there to be made. Now, jumping over quickly to the Buffalo Sabres, defenseman Nathan Beaulieu apparently would like a fresh start somewhere else. He's kind of frustrated with the amount of lack of playing time, I guess, as well as being a healthy scratch on occasion. And apparently he's asked for a trade out of Buffalo. After getting off to an incredible start, the Sabres have really fallen from grace here and gotten themselves to a point where playoffs are certainly no longer a certainty at all, and may not be in the cards for this year. So Beaulieu looking to get out. I don't see much of a return there, but another team might be interested in picking him up for a playoff run as a depth piece. But at this point in his career, I don't think Nathan Beaulieu is more than a third pair guy at best. And on most teams, he's going to be, a 6th, 7, number 8 guy. So, unfortunately, this Nathan Beaulieu just hasn't quite worked out to be as good of an NHL defenseman as many had hoped when he was drafted. And I do see his time in the NHL being limited here moving forward. Now, jumping over quickly here before we go to the Philadelphia Flyers and Wayne Simmons, one interesting piece that came from the Elliot Friedman 31 Thoughts blog and podcast here was possibly the Nashville Predators being the team that he ends up getting moved to. And I do believe that it's very, very likely that the Flyers do end up trading Simmons, and that the Predators are really trying to add a forward as well. Ever since they went to the Stanley Cup Finals a couple seasons ago, they're really anxious to get back there and bring that Stanley Cup home to Nashville. They've got a pretty solid team, and obviously it would not be any surprise to see them bulk up at the forward position as well. Obviously, they'd probably be looking to move a variety of picks or prospects, but I don't see them wanting to move some prize prospects like, for example, an Eeli Tolvanen or a Dante Fabro. But they don't have a lot of other really intriguing prospects, in my opinion, in their system right now. At least that would be anywhere close to being NHL ready. So they might have to look at moving something off the roster, maybe a Ryan Hartman, for example, or maybe a first-round pick or something to that effect. But it is believed by Elliot Friedman here that Nashville has interest and might be the team to watch here when it comes to acquiring Wayne Simmonds out of Philadelphia. So I know we had a lot to cover here today. All kinds of teams looking to make some moves and shake things up and get ready for the playoffs. Like I said in the opening here, it looks like we're going to have a very, very busy NHL trade season as we approach the NHL trade deadline coming up next month, February the 25th. Of course, I want to hear your thoughts and comments down below on all these rumors going around, what teams should acquire. Let me know your thoughts here and we'll continue the conversation in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up before you go. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll catch you next time.